Alright, elephant in the room. Cyberpunk released way earlier than it should have. The game is a mess, workers were heavily mistreated, we were lied to for months. I will happily call it a disaster piece. So, what happens now? CD Projekt will spend weeks, if not months, patching out the various issues. The last-gen console versions will hopefully become playable. Some family-friendly PR nonsense with their lawyers and investors will happen. Some interviews will come out, some new reviews, and la-di-da, we all move on to The Witcher 4, right? It would be nice if it were that easy, but everyone seems to conveniently forget that Cyberpunk isn't the first game to suffer like this. Now, there's a million reasons for it. There's investor pressure, budget restrictions, poor management, the list could go on and on. But a guarantee is that the same will happen to Cyberpunk as has happened to several titles in the past. It'll recover. It'll be widely regarded as a great game of its time, and only when the next big game to follow in its wake shows up is everyone suddenly going to remember and decide to speak up about the ongoing issues in the video game industry. These same issues sealed Cyberpunk's fate years ago. So, while we all patiently wait for Halo Infinite and Final Fantasy XVI to not have these issues, sit down, grab a coffee. We've got video games to talk about. It's no secret to the masses that crunch plagues the entertainment industry. Time and time again, we hear about developers needing medical care, losing relationships, sometimes literally fearing their own death, and there still seems to be no end in sight. It's a rather disgusting trope, but it seems no game, movie, or otherwise can get made without the deliberate exploitation of workers, to the point that devs expect it when getting a job. How broken does a system have to be that people expect to get exploited? With no end in sight while monetary gains seem to motivate the issues only to get worse and worse, you end up with an entire generation of angry kids and adults rioting in the streets. I'll take it easy. My point is, crunch, at least mandatory crunch, has become completely unavoidable. And while there are a few white knights at least telling magazines that they have the money to avoid it, the truth is not every company has that luxury. Basically, no individual has that luxury. It's become a part of the culture, the zeitgeist, if you will. If you're working on a piece of entertainment, especially games, the last few weeks, months, or apparently in recent news, years, need to be spent in utterly tormenting conditions, otherwise all the work you've been doing all this time will be worthless. Makes me wonder if that's why we lost Star Wars 1313, literally for the betterment of the industry. Then again, they did release Anthem instead. So what happened at CD Projekt Red? It's evident they put more thought into their projects and business than most studios, being widely regarded by fans as a studio that actively cares about and listens to its audience. They created the Good Old Games platform, a digital distribution website and service that sells and organizes DRM-free games, as well as giving bonus content, polished PC ports, and a huge library of vintage software for people to enjoy. The Witcher 3 had an incredible DLC policy, with free content given to everyone who owned the game, its expansions being more than reasonably priced and given a ridiculous amount of genuinely fantastic content. TV shows, graphic novels, the coolest set of statues I think I've ever laid eyes on. Everything seems to point towards CDPR being a collective that really cares about their artwork, and interview after interview, they claim to care about their workers. But since I've mentioned The Witcher, let's start with the contradictions that came from its development. It's October of 2014. A disgruntled former employee of CDPR comes out with a thrashing statement. The bullshitting with The Witcher 3 started from day one. PR is creating an overblown vision of a game that doesn't exist while the team is in crazy crunch time for over a year now. And rather than comment on their employees being in crunch for over a year, they simply comment on the quality of the gameplay in question, leaving everything else to the imagination. Months before the game's release, core systems had failed to be implemented, causing its original 2014 release date to be pushed to February, and later, further pushed to May. Crunch for its developers had already been going on for a year from October, which means at minimum a year and a half was spent with late nights, extra working days, missed holidays, health problems, and an onslaught of issues, all caused by incompetence in management. The Witcher's development was marred by development leads being chosen by companionship rather than experience. According to More Than a Few articles, devs were scared of their managers playing video games, because they'd randomly show up wanting new features to be implemented just because they liked them, with no thought into how they'd fit into The Witcher systems. It's more than reasonable that a lot of the newer staff of the studio would be pissed, with their only recompense being some apologetic emails and a totally fair paycheck. Great news coming from the studio all the others should be like, Now, as we've all come to know, no good game can be made without crunch. Yes, The Witcher 3 was a truly marvelous experience, especially after all that crunch paid off since they decided to release the game at the right time. The entire situation feels eerily familiar, and I'm not just talking about CDPR. Look at Anthem, look at Mass Effect, No Man's Sky, Fallout 76. Hell, the Game Awards just passed, and one of the winners was my own favorite game, and one of these examples, Final Fantasy XIV. The crazy thing is, most of these games have since recovered from their launches, and in spectacular fashion. Mass Effect Andromeda is sitting at an 84% on Steam. No Man's Sky shook the entire industry with its god-awful launch, and now has a very healthy 95%. The Witcher 3 is widely regarded as one of the greatest games of all time, which is part of the reason Cyberpunk was so hyped up for its release. The truth of the matter is, Cyberpunk is going to recover, just like the countless garbage launches that have come before it, and the countless garbage launches that will come after. Fingers crossed for Anthem 2.0 though. But how is it possible? How can these games recover after such a horrifying beginning to literally be worked out of the dumpster fire state they're in? The unfortunate, though incomplete answer is more crunch for developers, but there's a hell of a lot more to it than that. Let's start with our most infamous culprit. The story of Hello Games' intimate close call with ego death is one for the history books. Sony pedestaled a 15-man team and gave them a community hell-bent on them changing the world. A single developer, not a salesman, a developer, forced to front interview after interview, press conferences and presentations alike, became the sole face responsible for changing gaming as we knew it. The man sells his home, loses his entire studio in a flood, has higher than AAA expectations thrust on him and his team for years because he wanted to make cool technology, and sure enough, all of it backfires. No Man's Sky comes out in 2016, after a hearty delay, mind you. Coincidence? And he's a liar. Hello Games ran off with the money. Sony threw them under the bus. Every news outlet in the world hones in on Sean Murray and Hello Games, and their silence becomes deafening. So how do you recover? Your game is riddled with bugs, All of your promised content is missing. The world that loved you one day before has made you into a pariah. Death threats, invasions, losing your accounts to a hacker, losing Sony support, all after having to deal with the immense pressure on top of all the hard work you've been doing? Easy. You stop trying to be a salesman and do what developers do best. You develop. After No Man's Sky released, Hello Games was well aware they had run out of options. Their game isn't what they wanted it to be, and could never have been what gamers expected of it by the time it came out. So, now that they had enough money to continue on, without needing to sell a second house, they simply shut up and they got to work. I could make the attached argument about how crunch doomed them from the start and how engaging in more isn't fair to the other employees. Every other YouTube channel is already talking about that now. So, no. I want to talk about the effectiveness of continuing to work on it despite no probable financial motive. How you get to use the fact that the gaming community never changes to your advantage. Every time a game gets released in a broken, messy state, everyone rises up out of anger and gets to sit up on their high horse, talking about how we shouldn't let developers keep lying to us like this. Game development is hard. It's a broken, messy industry, and people's lives are on the line based on when a game is released. Hello Games had a lot of funding from Sony betting on their summer release. Asking for another year or two, despite how badly they needed it, probably wasn't an option for them. No, crunch isn't fair, and poor management is still poor management. But there are times where the passionate form of crunch, the passion of developers to keep going, can lead to a success story. November, the Foundation update, and the breaking of silence from Sean Murray and Hello Games. Months later comes the Pathfinder update, Atlas, Next, Beyond. The updates keep coming out. Despite years of hardship, months of complete ostracization from its community, Hello Games endured, continued their work, and 3 years after its release, No Man's Sky is winning awards. PR detracts from what developers can do, whether it's empty promises, being forced to hide information, causing too much of a hype train. There's a reason the expression in the video game industry is no PR is good PR. When they could finally sit down and focus on building, on making their game, when the focus wasn't on these stupid interviews and making promises no one should have expected them to keep, things get done. And they'll continue to get done. Since I did briefly mention it before, Anthem isn't the first game to try and reboot itself and try to release under the exact same name. Another massive studio holds the rights to that story, and that's Square Enix, and their complete mess that they called Final Fantasy XIV. There is an absurd amount of detail and complexity to this story, and for far better context than I will go to in this video, I highly recommend you go check out the fantastic documentary by NoClip on Final Fantasy's Rebirth. But here's a more basic outline of events. In 2004, Square Enix began the development of an MMO codenamed Rapture. Some years of concept and pre-production pass, eventually developing and utilizing the Crystal Tools engine most famous for Final Fantasy XIII. The game is announced in 2009 under the Final Fantasy name, with excitement from fans all over due to the general success of their previous MMO, Final Fantasy XI. In 2010, after a disturbingly buggy and empty beta closed into the launch of the game, Universal negativity is all it was met with. Broken battle systems, no incentive to log in, server issues, performance tanks, no PS3 version which was previously promised, a lackluster main quest, mediocre endgame content. Nothing that made an MMO good was a part of 14, nor anything that made a Final Fantasy game. Management thrusted development forward as fast as it could, with developers making the engine as new features needed to be incorporated into the game. Sidelined by Final Fantasy XIII, 14 was all but doomed to fail for the same crappy management decisions that seem to have plagued Cyberpunk. The president of Square Enix issued a public apology, and all Square seemed to be able to do was cut their subscription fees and move on. But move on they didn't. At the beginning of 2011, the leading team and management on the project completely changed over, now led by the wonderful Naoki Yoshida, otherwise known as Yoshi P by the community. Development started almost immediately on major patches to fix the current state of the game, but Yoshida-san came up with a crazy plan. Despite his need for transparency to players, this plan would be kept a complete secret, probably given how psychotic it probably sounded. Yoshida's team would rebuild Final Fantasy XIV from the ground up, using a brand new game engine similar to the infamous Luminous engine, a project that would be announced in October of 2011, codenamed 2.0. It would still be Final Fantasy XIV, the general lore and world would still carry over. It was still an MMO, but top to bottom, everything would be refreshed, even in a brand new, completely re-engineered game engine. Regular updates for 1.0 came out, with a great deal of fixes all in all improving the game to a fairly decent state, but it was all setting up for the release of 2.0, which they would fittingly call A Realm Reborn. Thanks to Yoshida having full design control without any financial interruptions from upper management, the team was able to build a brand new MMO in just under 3 years, engine and all, which was previously thought impossible. August 23rd, 2013 hits, and save a few server issues because the game was literally too good and people kept buying it, everything turned into a massive success, and is now the second most played MMO in the world, of course second to the titan that is World of Warcraft. So once again, it took work without the financial pressure of releasing early, even costing Square Enix time on releasing other titles. The common thread here is that investor and financial pressure ruins game releases. Publishers can pull their funding, which can result in entire studios being shut down in an instant. People who have worked for years can suddenly see all they've done washed away with a snap of some executive's fingers. CD Projekt Red had seen stock prices dropping ahead of Cyberpunk's original release because they were delaying it too much. They weren't going to make the money back fast enough. And when pressure from your community and your effective wallet pile up on you that much, well. What'll happen to CDPR? Basically, nothing. They've had a few weeks and have a few more weeks of PR to figure out. Bug fixes will come at the cost of their developers' livelihoods. Everyone will eventually forget the issue and call Cyberpunk a fantastic game, of which I would say it is, despite its technical issues. They're already putting out patch after patch, working tirelessly while my heart cries for their Twitter person and what they probably have to sift through every day. I'm not excusing the decisions of management. They called their release way too early, including to investors. I'm not in their position, so I don't know how easy it would have been to push for another year, but that was the move they should have taken and chose not to, and now plenty of people have gotten hurt and lost valuable time with their loved ones and to themselves because of it. I couldn't care less about the angry gamers who are mad that their game is buggy. Without sufficient data, we don't really know if things have gotten better at CDPR since the days of The Witcher 3, but even if they have, it hasn't been by much. The point of all of this isn't to just further talk about how crunch is awful and is the wrong way to do things. We all know that already. But I keep seeing people angry and upset that developers keep releasing things too early. Meanwhile, none of us have done a single thing to try and stop that practice. Everyone keeps pressuring these developers to overachieve from what's actually possible. We let these grandiose investment firms and corporations control our content, harm the developers we owe so much respect to, throw loot boxes and microtransactions at us, and think we're gonna win by writing an angry rant on Reddit. The truth of the matter is, as long as money is involved, we're always going to have these issues. So, I've come up with a real solution. The only way to make video games great again is the complete abolishment of currency. We must live in a great anarcho-gamerist state where the only value comes from how many tilted towers you Fortnited. Obviously, I don't have a real answer to these issues. I'm some dude on the internet who spent half of my time working on this video looking at tutorials on how to make it. I'm not the one with the answers. But there needs to be a stronger discussion about all of this. Yeah, crunch is awful and it ruins lives. But think about the bigger picture, think about what causes crunch. CD Projekt really is a company that gives a shit. They make garbage management decisions and it resulted in the mess we have now, but I don't believe they go out of their way to make their devs miserable. They're just as passionate as we are and they're trying their best. But good old Uncle Sam won't see that passion through unless his wallet's padded. Thank you for sitting through this rant episode of mine. I'm trying to make better content, and I would love it if more people could see my stuff, mostly so that I can get better criticism. I work really hard on these videos. I do just about everything, even all of the music that you hear in the background is all produced and recorded by myself. I would love it if you took the time to subscribe to my channel. You can leave a like if you enjoyed it. You can dislike the video if you think I can do a better job. Leave a comment down below telling me what you think about crunch, your own experiences, what issues you have with the industry, or hell, even if you just want to say hi. I'm gonna try to do a better job of engaging with everyone from now on. The soundtracks for my videos do go up on every major streaming service, and I do have a Patreon in the description if you do want to give me a little extra support. Until next time, Samurai.